What's going on, everyone? My name is Nicholas Merton here at Data Dash, and today is May 24th of 2020. Well, folks, I hope you all are having a fantastic day wherever you are, and in today's video, I have the fortunate privilege of sitting down with one of my good friends, Brad Lowry, otherwise known as Blockchain Brad, and many of you have probably already seen his channel before, where he dives into a lot of interesting cutting-edge projects and technologies within the cryptocurrency space. So today, I'm not only hoping to really get his perspective as to what he sees as some of the next generation projects in the blockchain space, but along with it as well, just get his perspective on some of the emerging trends in DeFi and enterprise blockchain. So we've got a lot of things to discuss in the video right after our quick sponsor. Our sponsor for today's episode is Bitpanda Pro. If you're on the hunt for a proven, trustworthy exchange in Europe to trade your crypto, then I recommend taking a look at Bitpanda. If you're just getting started, many people refer to Bitpanda as the European Coinbase, so it can be a great place to start in getting your first crypto positions. With over 5 years of experience serving the industry by offering easy and secure access to digital currencies, Bitpanda has really earned its reputation. Check out the link down below in the description for more information. Alrighty, everyone, so in today's video, I'm very fortunate to be sitting down with my good friend Brad Lowry, otherwise known and probably more well known as Blockchain Brad in the cryptocurrency space. I've not only gotten to know Brad for a very long time over the last couple of years as I've been creating content in the cryptocurrency space alongside him, and I want to say, Brad, thank you very much for making the time, man. It's an honor to have you on and different angles of the world and stuff as you're over in Australia and I'm here in the US.
Mate, as always, we've been friends for a really long time for a good reason, Nick, and that is because we both, really respect what's happening in blockchain and DeFi, and we also have always been really transparent and real about why we like it, what we like. So, Nick, it's always such a privilege to be able to just catch up with you. You're leading the space as always and doing amazing work.
Well, thank you, Brad. I appreciate it, man. Same and likewise to you as well. I think speaking of those topics you mentioned, we're on the cutting edge of a lot of interesting things. I know you and I always try to bounce back and forth from time to time about what things are catching our eye in the space, what kind of trends are we spotting. And I think obviously you and I have been pretty thrilled about what's been going on in the DeFi space or decentralized finance movement. And I've been meaning to actually talk a little bit about this more on the channel. I've kind of talked about the kind of buzz around it. I've been following it since before there was DeFi. We've been talking about Kyber Network between the two of us for a long time. And then also you have other players at Compound coming up, DYDX, all these interesting different little approaches to building new financial applications. But I'm curious in this case, Brad, I want to give you a few seconds to just kind of take the stage. In the sense of DeFi and also some of maybe of the other emerging trends in the space, what are the things that are kind of catching your eye right now? What things have got you excited at the moment?
That's a big question. I mean, I know that you're a huge proponent of DeFi too, and when it comes to DeFi, I first and foremost just love the fact that we're moving away from legacy systems and we're doing whatever we possibly can to, for want of better terms, to shift the paradigm, to enable the operations of open blockchains to come to the fore and start to be experimented with and tinkered with so that we can see more empirical evidence of real use case, Nick, and real adoption. So for me, you probably know this, and this is going to be controversial, but one of the things that I've started to really dive deeply into is oracles, because they are part of that fundamental base layer. And as someone who's a huge proponent of Ethereum for many reasons, and it's not, because I own Ethereum, even though I do, it's because I support Ethereum for all of the obvious reasons of the network effect, of the developers, of the ethos first and foremost, but also because fundamentally they do mimic the ideals in proof when it comes to decentralized applications, decentralized technologies. So, yeah, I've really tried to uplift the narrative. I've really tried to continue my research and focus on DeFi in an agnostic way, but I keep leading back into and being attracted and driven to the Ethereum network. So at the moment, I, again, try to remove myself from any sense of bias, but also try to understand, okay, what are some of the essential ingredients that really are going to push DeFi to the next level? And honestly, Nick, oracles are in that equation. They are something that I regard as fundamental. And I also think that we need to look at what is known as a poly-oracle world, where you don't just box yourself into one oracle, because it's not how DeFi is going to really thrive in the future.
Yeah. No,
if you know what I mean.
yeah, no, yeah, sorry. I just I think you were building on that. Yeah, no, I completely agree in this case. So, in the sense of Oracle technology, there's a few different players that you and I have talked about before in the sense of this kind of not so much even a competition. I think it's a sense of different approaches to building oracles because as we've seen with DeFi, we're not in a permanently decentralized world just yet. You have smart contracts, for example, that are pulling from centralized price feeds. You have people as well who built systems that still rely or still have some kind of key management from their team or the developers. So in this sense of oracles, in this case, what are some of the different approaches you're seeing? I know we've talked a lot about Chainlink on the channel, but there's also things like Teller and Band Protocol that I know you've been really deep in. You've also had some interviews with the founders. Could you maybe spend some time, I guess, on this topic of oracles, maybe dive in a little bit in the sense of the differences between their approaches and how some of the players might be taking more of a decentralized approach?
Yeah, I'll certainly. I mean, I don't want to be remiss and speak in too much detail for each of them because obviously that's where the primary source of information comes, and that's where it's valid. But honestly, Nick, I am a proponent of utilizing again multiple oracles, utilizing oracles that are trying to move away from legacy systems and perhaps even in an experimental level allow us to have increased security and to have increased or more instantaneous price feeds, as you mentioned. And there's lots of reasons why anyone would choose, for example, Chainlink, and they're all valid. If you're looking for something, for example, that has a system built in that is fundamentally by design, perhaps more decentralized as a network than, let's say, an example of a pre-existing Oracleized approach. But what I think is really important when it comes to oracles is that you have that diversity, you have the options built in. So that's why I'm so open to oracles. That's why I've been talking about Teller as an example, but it's not because I am trying to advocate for a one-stop shop when it comes to oracles. It's just that Teller, is an example where they don't have a lot of there's not a lot of people who understand exactly what Teller is. They don't have a huge platform in terms of marketing, and a lot of people don't understand, the core value of what they stand for. So I've really tried to assess the value of oracles in terms of the DeFi spectrum, because that's a really prominent concept. It's a really valid sort of way of assessing DeFi at the moment. There's no one single position on the spectrum that's, arguably the best, position to be on. But once again, I think what's most important is that the oracles reflect the ethos of DeFi. So if you go back to the likes, for example, of pre-existing oracles before, even DeFi was a thing, often that permission system, the permission nature of oracles themselves doesn't really reflect, the ideals of anything in the hybridized CeFi across the DeFi movement. So that's why, for me, it's so important to make sure that the oracles reflect that. Now, when it comes to something like, for example, Chainlink or Band, there are degrees of trust built into that, and that's okay. For those who are really big on Chainlink, there's a lot of very zealous, participants. They're very much in the camp of trying to defend and protect the integrity of Chainlink, and that's fine. I actually own Chainlink as well, as part of my portfolio, but what is interesting is that trust itself exists on the similar continuum as does DeFi. And so for me, looking at what are fundamentally trustless designs is just as important as looking at elements of trust built into decentralized networks that offer Oracle systems, that might have permission nodes. So once again, the Oracle itself, many people don't quite understand, but it's absolutely fundamental to outsourcing that external data to enable, and relay that information into the blockchain to make sure that smart contracts can be executed in a way that, wouldn't be enabled if they didn't exist.
Yeah.
So it's really part of that core engine.
Yeah. Just thinking on that, Brad, I guess we should probably explain that for some people, as you were kind of alluding to there. In regards to oracles, for those who may not know, an oracle kind of serves as a middleware solution to connect external data systems. So, for example, like traditional corporate, databases, data centers in this case, that would be, having input information for financial markets, other forms of data, and being able to transmit that into a blockchain network like Ethereum. And the problem is that Ethereum can't really communicate with these outward systems, right? It doesn't really know how to connect in these systems or communicate because Ethereum nodes communicate with one another. So if you wanted to build
Exactly.
a useful smart contract, as you were alluding to, Brad, and you want to use data from the real world, first off, you need to know how you're going to get that data, and along with that, how do you know that the data coming in is truthful, right? That's the difficult challenge. So, yeah.
Yeah, and also most importantly, in the context of the trilemma, there are always trade-offs depending on which oracle you may be using
Right.
as well. And so, Nick, it's such a really valid conversation to have now because, again, I live for the poly-oracle narrative. I see such value in, for example, if you take what's called the medianizer approach, that's what I coined it, where you may, shop for different types of oracles to basically service your needs. There's going to be a suite of options available for you. And my argument always is, why not make sure that there's positions along that continuum that are accessible when it comes to oracles, for example. So that's why I really try to uplift the value of Teller, as well as look at other things like Chainlink, explore the true, genuine nature of what they're actually about technologically. So if you look deeply, you start to see the emergence of permissioned aspects built into Chainlink, for example. And there's nothing wrong with that, especially in the context of enterprise. And we can talk a lot about that, Nick, because enterprise is another buzzword that's really prominent right now in the blockchain space, and also just more generally in terms of the mainstream sector, looking at how they can benefit from the value, the proposition of blockchain, and how they can optimize their performance. And when it comes to permission, that's often a very strong connection between the existing systems that exist now in legacy models. So once again, I'm trying to be a realist and look at, okay, where is the likely market interest of the future? And often the case is in private blockchain too. And some would argue that they're databases, but when you start to see innovations that cross the bridge or enable a bridge, like oracles, essentially are, where you start to see protocols that enable enterprise to move into open blockchains, that can also be a boon for the likes of something like Chainlink, for example, which does have a permission gear built into its model. But then there's also the other side of it, where you may want to advocate for that, pure DeFi approach, where things are truly decentralized by core design as an oracle to once again reflect the trustless nature of something like Ethereum. So for me, Teller, for example, is perfectly situated for integration with the Ethereum ethos and with all the applications that come forth. Absolutely, but that doesn't mean that Chainlink doesn't have its position, and it certainly doesn't mean that it hasn't been an immensely successful startup from its beginnings. But again, I'm just really trying to open up the Oracle book, really espousing intellectual conversations about what they are, and most importantly, looking at what they pragmatically do, because there's going to be a lot of adoption, I think, of something like Teller in the future, Nick. And then with the likes of Band, you're seeing that also act in its own way with its marketplace focus. Certainly it's really starting to move as well. A lot of people are paying attention because it has a strategy, in terms of marketing, much like Link. A lot of people see it as, a potential threat. I don't agree. I think that there's plenty of room in the space for oracles to really move the space forward and showcase why they matter and why they should be taken seriously.
Yeah, no, honestly, I would say that there's going to be a lot of different players, and I don't see them so much as competition in the space. And we're so early on. I mean, honestly, the cryptocurrency space is still in its wild, wild west days. DeFi alone itself is definitely in its beginning days as well. But I wanted to go ahead and talk to you about another interesting aspect of DeFi in this case that I think a lot of people haven't talked about, Brad, and that's honestly the argument for getting people towards actually using wallets at the end of the day. And this has been something that we've been really, I've been driving here on the not a little bit on the channel, but also just in my conversations with people at the space. And I see this kind of new age of kind of smart wallets coming up in the crypto space. So these are platforms where users are their own custodian, but it's kind of a sweet spot between the traditional world of centralized exchanges and terrible wallets. So, for the last decade, we've been having probably one of the biggest issues in the space that doesn't get addressed is the exchange hacks that have been going on. Back a couple of months ago, we had the Plus token Ponzi scheme that stolen a lot of people's funds, and you tie that in with some of the exchange hacks as well that happened from the old days from Mt. Gox back in 2013, all the way up still here to 2020. We're still having exchange hacks in the crypto space. So The thing is, I think we're going to be moving out of that world, but we're also not going to be relying on the older wallets of the existent world today. I think we're going to be moving into an environment where we start to see people utilizing smart wallets that make it simple to be your own custodian, but also plug into a lot of services within the DeFi space. And as you were kind of alluding to as well, in regards to making value for DeFi, you kind of have to be a fan of oracles in order to be a fan of DeFi at the end of the day, because oracles are going to actually pull into the real world data to make so many DeFi based applications useful. So yeah,
exactly, Nick. And on that note, you talk about the imperative of having those wallets, also making sure that there's that non-custody approach, having non-custodial options there. That's really important. It's the same with DEXs as opposed to centralized exchanges. That is so important also to reflect the same, value proposition and the very crux of what we're all trying to, espouse, which is the movement and progression towards more and more DeFi by proof and by empirical evidence, and most importantly, seeing that true volume emerge from real applications doing real things. At the moment, Nick, we see a real dearth of that still. We're still very much in a nascent experimental time, and we just really shouldn't kid ourselves, because the people taking part in this grand experiment we call DeFi are the people that literally are changing or potentially changing what is, a very outdated legacy model of finance. And it is that finance sort of sector that's really going to lead the narrative, because that's where, a lot of the interest is and exists and lies. So for me, any technology that's going to enfranchise change is absolutely imperative to know, and from that base layer up. And the other thing too is the agnostic aspect as well, because one of the beautiful things about oracles is it's not something that has, an affinity with any particular platform, as you know. The oracles exist, as fuel. They are imperative to make sure that any of these platforms that are coming forth now can operate with, best outcomes or have more security built in, so that we don't see Black Thursdays that are, continuously happening in the future. We need that stability. We need that security built in. We need also that reliability of price feeds, and we also need increasing speed. So there's different sort of there's different technologies for different use cases in that context. But the big question will be, Nick, is what of these other platforms coming forth now? In the context also of scalability, of speed. We've heard, the age-old value of, huge TPS, but the biggest challenge is actually network effects and garnering that developer support. Yeah. When we see the likes of Nia coming in the future, and Solana recently just emerged, and we see Polkadot, moving in for interoperability. We see the likes of Icon. I mean, there's so many we talk about, but the reality is, which of those is really showcasing evidence empirically of development, of adoption, and of real volume for real applications. Yeah. And there's very little of that even now. So what are your thoughts, since we're having this conversation in that context of platforms, Nick, when we both know a lot about Ethereum and we both support it so much?
Yeah, the reason why I'm a pretty big advocate for Ethereum is simply for that network effect. I mean, Solidity as a language is far from perfect. Not to say that Ethereum hasn't had its issues. It's had, as we were just talking about, hacks a while ago. There's been, not fraudulent code. There's been poor code in this case that's led to the parity hack. That's led to, of course, the DAO in this case, which is probably still to this day the biggest issue for Ethereum. And again, as we talk about this, as we're going through kind of an evolving space here, I know that we're going to be seeing a lot of different competitors still to this day. I think that some of them are currently persistent right now in the space. I think there's NEO, for example, that will have 3.0. I'll be interested to see if that brings a lot of the necessary improvements NEO needs in order to actually be used by a lot of, enterprise, or actually be building, for example, potential DeFi on another protocol. I mean, Ethereum's just kind of dominated this. And the reason why is simply because of that network effect you mentioned. Neo, Cardano, I have people always mention different protocols and stuff, and they ask me, some of you guys might be watching as well, and some of you guys might be these people, but I get asked a lot about, Nick, what do you think about this up-to-date protocol and stuff? And, Brad and I also have the same conversations and stuff, but the thing for me is that it's like, look, they could build the greatest system in the world, but what app do they have on there that I can use right now? Do they have do they have a compound finance equivalent? Do they have a MakerDAO equivalent? Do they have DYDX where I can do leverage trading? Do they have, decentralized exchanges? Do they have insurance on chain and stuff where I can basically pay a certain amount of ETH to get insurance for a certain amount of funds? Like, there's all these wonderful, amazing tools that are being built on Ethereum, and they're far from perfect, and they're not ready to be scaled out. Some of them aren't. Some of them have
And
been
that's
well
why I
tested out.
love. That's why I love what you're saying, is because you're such a realist about this, Nick. Is that it's one thing to come out with one aspect of the trilemma really nailed, and often the narrative has been scalability, but it's another thing to come out with some semblance of value early on in this narrative or in this sort of nascent time and showcase that are willing to construct, and evolve. And that's certainly what Ethereum's done. Vitalik has never been someone to say that they have everything perfect. But one of the things I'm really excited about with Ethereum is the tech stack itself, and not just the applications. I mean, things like optimistic rollups, looking at ZK development there with all of the privacy focus, looking at literally how they're going to holistically evolve and compete at the level of future offerings when it comes to platforms, like some of the ones I've mentioned. The reality is, Nick, they're well and truly out of the gate. And so much like we've seen in the past with legacy technology or pre-existing or pre-blockchain and crypto technology, we see many times that the very best tech is kind of like an oversold narrative, because there's not really any such thing. It's just those in the circumstance at the right time, the right place for the market fit, to really then start to garner a lot of support. And I think Ethereum's doing that. And I think that anyone who doesn't acknowledge already how far they've come is kind of missing the mark. But when it comes to the future, when it comes to real proof, that's always going to be based on real volumes of real applications and real users. And to be honest, Nick, I do see the majority of that on Ethereum. I see the likes of Icon, for example, not to shill them, because that's certainly not my intention. But if you study up on some of the evidence of what they're doing, they don't focus a lot on the number of applications that they have. What they do over in their network is they look at few, but make sure that they can evidence real adoption or real use case for those particular applications built on their network. And that's the way it should be. It shouldn't be about having a million non-functioning applications, and by default then being popularized. And I think that more and more time over time, we're going to see more of that shown in Ethereum. But still today, we see a lot of startups that don't need a token, or we see a lot of startups that were experimental, did ICOs in 2017, and later, that perhaps didn't need to exist. And we're going to see a continual cleaning or cleansing of that problem. And then as we transition from what was very much a hype-based experimental crowdfunding mechanism into the legitimate use case of Ethereum, which is very complex in itself, because as we know, Ethereum as money as a narrative, Ethereum as fuel for its core facility or its core engine, which is fundamentally about transactions, about smart contracts, and about the gas that fuels it all. There's so many different ways you can color Ethereum or ETH, as it is. But fundamentally, I'm very much a proponent of what they're doing, and I'm very bullish on Ethereum more generally.
Yeah, no, I think again, Ethereum's been going into a few different directions. DeFi has become much more of a buzzword and stuff, and I think honestly there is some understandable hype to it. It's understandable why people are excited about it. I'm very excited about the space. And then outside of that, you have the enterprise side. I think again, as you mentioned, how a few blockchains like Icon and a few others have done a successful job of having a very mature kind of enterprise approach. I think you're seeing that as well with some of the developments with the baseline protocol and the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance. I think it'd be interesting to see some more develops like that for Ethereum, because I don't think it's hit that maturity yet on selling why doing things on mainnet is very important rather than doing Hyperledger or private chains.
Exactly.
I think that there's not much use cases there. In that case, it's having it on a settled main chain. In this case, basically being able to communicate with one another, to interact with something where we don't have to trust one another. I always use the example.
Nick, we should talk about that more. Sorry to interrupt, but when you say baseline, I don't want to sort of shill that. I think it's it's really being presented by various parties in terms of value. But if we get real about that, when it comes to open blockchains, the only way that any of the these base platforms have any value in enterprise context is if they can come across, is if those open blockchains can sort of capitalize on the value of enterprise interest. Like you said, I mean, it's almost counterproductive to start to uplift the value of permission networks or permission blockchains, right, when in fact they've existed for a long time as databases within their own silos. So the big question will be, Nick, is what degree of adoption do we see born from these exciting ventures, born from the baseline approach? It's an absolute in my mind with regard to optimizing the value of something like Ethereum, and that's how I see baseline, really exploring the two worlds.
Yeah, I think the philosophy of it alone, just treating Ethereum as, again, as we talked about with Chainlink being a middleware between traditional SAP systems and different data systems, we're basically trying to communicate with traditional architecture from corporations. If you want them actually utilizing Ethereum, you're going to need an Oracle. The same goes here in the sense of using Ethereum, not so much as a separate thing. People view it as the next internet, but it's a tech stack in the way that companies interact with the world. It's a way where you and I can basically utilize Ethereum as a technology where we can start to make contractual agreements that don't rely on any third party, that can cost us less than a few pennies. And at the end of the day, we can do so many unique things with, whether it be exchanging, it's going to be some form of exchanging value most likely, but being able to do that in very creative ways, whether that's financial contracts, whether that's making payments, whether that's making a trade of some sort without needing some kind of counterparty or having to put our funds on an exchange. There's so many different routes that you can take with DeFi. And again, this thing, might sound familiar to a lot of people, this idea, because it's been around before DeFi. It's been what this crypto space has been all about. It started off with the simple application of censorship-resistant money that doesn't rely on a central bank and has a fixed monetary policy. And now we're seeing it explored in the sense of financial applications and having sound money in that case, or something that's fixed. Plus, you have this system that's censorship resistant and open up for any company to use it in any way, shape, or form and stuff, and to get real creative with it, as well as the open source community and stuff where a lot of the developments actually come from. I think it's very exciting to see. But yeah,
and it's really interesting. It's interesting to see the discussions also from the private sector or from the private blockchain sector. I mean, if you listen to some of the podcasts led from R3, experts, I suppose, or looking at the Hyperledger community and looking even beyond that, it's fascinating to hear some of the feedback they have with regard to baseline, for example. But what I like, Nick, is that there is this experimentation. Let's not kid ourselves. That's the stage we're at. But it's very crucial experimentation, just like oracles are, and just like any tech that's going to bridge the two, the value of existing enterprise into the domain of blockchain. These protocols are fundamental to really enable, that possibility. So it's exciting to see that not only is this an open source project and funded very much by the Ethereum Foundation, but it's open to, more inclusion. It's open to more members as well. So obviously it's going to be based on the integrity of those that are part of that baseline movement. But this is just one example of positive movements in the direction of building up the value of public blockchains more generally in the context of real use and real adoption. So the big question now is, what degree do we have today when it comes to proof of real adoption, Nick? And it's still quite small, by proof. But the fact that it is there is exciting. And the fact that not everything's tokenized also on the Ethereum network is something I like. Like you mentioned, there's this whole suite of tools that are there literally for the taking. For developers. So it's very pro-dev. It's not just, this world of speculation that many people know and love in crypto, but it's literally the tech stack and the tech tools to build out something that is challenging the status quo and not reinventing age-old wheels. And that's really what gets a lot of the devs in. And it's certainly also what gets a lot of us in, even when it comes to speculation, because quickly you learn, what you're speculating on. What is this thing, when they're engaging in a particular coin or a token.
Yeah, I think what we've seen is a realization of what's valuable and what's not in this space. Finance is obviously the killer industry for blockchain because you can remove a lot of trusted entities by doing these kind of peer-to-peer applications. But again, as you mentioned, the value shifted from having these kind of random sporadic tokens and having more stable coins, using Ether or wrapped Bitcoin or something like that. Something that's, again, separate from central banks if you wanted something like that. And then being able to make really interesting financial products, in this case, on interacting with those stable coins, interacting with trading digital assets. And I think that's kind of the future of where this really is valuable. Being able to
I totally agree.
Open up opportunities up to as many people as possible, and again, taking a much more mature approach and stuff that's more fun. We see what worked and what didn't, and we've evolved Ethereum in that case, I think, as a collective community, especially the open source community. So
100% agree. And Nick, stablecoins are interesting too. in that context, because Nick, when we talk about the concerns perhaps of those parties in the centralized world of finance, no doubt they're concerned, and no doubt that they're also responding in kind to all of the innovation we see when it comes to stablecoins, especially when there is an absolute proof that some of these are not, again, backed by legacy models. They're actually innovating and backing themselves with the integrity of something like Maker, for example. And we see a lot of really interesting democratic approaches to looking at how that's going to move forward. But it is so exciting to see the real use case of stablecoins and the whole, again, the spectrum of those. And we're going to see, I think, more experimentation and integration of stablecoins in that whole spectrum of CeFi to DeFi as well, to really uphold the future of this as a valid system where we can all play in finance and reap the benefits of peer-to-peer and trustless mechanisms.
Absolutely. I think Maker's the first of many. I'm still kind of shocked that to this date and stuff with how far Maker's been around for, that we haven't seen as much as I expected. But I think you'll start to see more decentralized autonomous organizations over the next coming months. But there's a lot to look forward to, man. There's a lot of innovation going on in the space. And I think, again, as you mentioned, Brad, there has been a real big shift over the last year or two and stuff in the sense of the focus of the space. It's a lot more mature. We have yet to really see that kind of mainstream adoption, whether you're talking about enterprise or you're talking about, for example, DeFi. But I think we're going to get to that point here in the next year or two. It's a matter of making DeFi more consumer facing and also making enterprise blockchain more enterprise facing, making it a lot more simple. Again, fixing some of those kinks in that case to be able to make it where they can work with traditional systems, understanding, again, where oracles and these public mainnets play a role in the tech stack, as well as other tools that you can provide to make it simple. But
exactly.
Yeah.
And Nick, one of the other things too is that historic aversion to interacting with a token, as you know, and we having both spoken to so many CEOs in the past, Nick, we know that when we talk with those in that position, and because they have that connection with so many other enterprise parties not engaging in crypto currently, there has been always this aversion or this supposition that there is somehow a one-step removed, approach to crypto. But we're seeing that break down. The borders of blockchain are sort of, or the barriers rather, are breaking down because we're starting to see engagement and interest from centralized parties in the validity of this technology, as opposed to this supposition that because there's the crypto casino aspect, and somehow, they shy away from it. They're not doing that now. And so it's going to be interesting to see what the pushback is from the immense success of something like Ethereum. It's still yet to be seen, because these parties don't want to miss their market share. They don't want to miss capitalizing these centralized parties. So that's why I mentioned, the emergence of these new and innovative approaches to stablecoins, because no doubt there are centralized parties all the way to government that are feeling threatened. And we're going to see, reactions to that, I'm sure, in different parts of the world. But fundamentally, peer-to-peer is what it's all about. At the end of the day, there is no means of turning this off. No matter what happens, I think both of you and I agree that we're advocates for that trustless goal. And anything that leads to that end is going to be something that is so important. And all the tooling that comes forth to enfranchise that or enable that, I'm all for. I want to see eventually a system where we have full proof that there's real volume and real respect and real use for trustless, whether they're tokenized or not, trustless systems, so that we can start to have better outcomes for the majority of people on the planet. Because the reality is that legacy models don't offer that. They are about trying to fatten the pockets of few at the top.
Absolutely, Brad. I think that's a good way to wrap it up there, man. That's a good way to just kind of point out the sheer kind of nature of DeFi, I think, is much more optimistic than what we're seeing in traditional systems. And I think, traditional systems, when it comes to innovation, it's more about the same in that case, in the sense of creating, I at the same time, I'm interested in the potential of something like a CBDC, but, like a central bank digital currency. But I think, again, a lot of the kind of central institutions that are looking at private blockchains, these kind of central solutions, they're not aimed at helping a lot of people throughout the world. So anyways, good point.
Nick, that's where your plans are. We all know that you're working on something really interesting, and you're going to be taking part in trying to build the infrastructure for tomorrow. And again, not to shield what you're working on, but it matters. It really does, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that there's technologies available, there's tokens available, there's systems available that are offering solutions to age-old problems, and that is fundamentally about making sure we have autonomy, we have control, we decide, we have non-custodial options. There's so many things that the blockchain offers, the open blockchain, that just haven't historically been offered before. And that's why we're all here at the end of the day, is to educate, I guess, and to utilize what is on offer and experiment with it, see what it can do, and not just simply speculate on prospective utility. Look at what is on offer for utility now.
Absolutely, Brad. Yeah, there's a lot of exciting developments going on. It's difficult for me. The way I kind of put it, it's, I basically learn one thing every day, and there's 5 things I can't keep up with. There's so much going on, but
me too.
But yeah, man,
never stops.
Yeah, man, that's the fun part about it. It's cool. There's always new things to learn about. But real quick, for those who may not know, Brad, what would be the best way to figure out about you and your content? Obviously, there's your YouTube channel and stuff, Blockchain Brad, which we'll go ahead and leave a link down below, as well as any other important links and stuff. But I know people can follow you on Twitter and other areas as well.
Firstly, Nick, thank you just for the conversation. I really appreciate the chance to catch up. You're certainly someone who just doesn't, try to fluff up the crypto space. I mean, you're very pragmatic, and I respect that. Just in terms of my position, I focus a lot on interviews to get primary source information for the people. So I'm kind of like one of the boring ones, one of the nerdy ones in the space. And as you said, Nick, Blockchain Brad on YouTube is, where I'll put up some stuff. I haven't been doing as many as I'd like to recently, and I'm going to do more. And then I just every now and then are on Twitter trying to engage there, but I'll try to move away more from that platform and just get to work, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that real work's being done. And my advice to everyone is to do your own research. And I know that's said a lot, but I genuinely stand by that, because when I interview the CEOs, Nick, that is what I'm doing as well. I'm not just there, trying to shill a coin. I'm literally trying to work out, is this legit, or is this, another rhyming word, if you can imagine, with regard to legitimacy or not. I want to make sure that team, that tech, and that token is really there for the long term. And if it's not, what the bloody hell is it doing in blockchain? And really, should it be there? And again, many people will argue that there's a space for the casino. Absolutely, of course, because that's part of Wall Street. There's always that aspect of speculation. I'm not denying that, but I want to make sure that there's integrity built into the speculation as well.
Sticking to the fundamentals, man. I love it. It's something we need more of in the space, looking for real utility. And again, I think we're getting to a point where there's a lot more of it in the space than where it used to be. So, Brian, I'm excited to see where you continue to focus and put your interest in over the next coming months. Definitely for those of you who either have or haven't seen Brad, definitely check out his channel, subscribe to him if you haven't. Brad's been a longtime fan, a friend of mine in the space, and it's been fun to get to know him over the years and stuff and see where his focus has gone. But thank you very much, Brad, for making the time, man. It's a pleasure having you on, and we'll have to do it again sometime in the future.
Absolutely, mate. You're welcome on my channel. We'll catch up on my side, next time. But thanks again for the invitation. I really enjoyed the chat today.
Absolutely, Brad. Take care, man.